Today is the day that I, instead of preaching a sermon, preach the state of the parish or the priest in charge's report so that we save time in the annual meeting instead of my having to preach a sermon here and then do my report. I just do my report in here. Now, I'll say that my sister is in town this weekend. She is an accountant, so we live two very different lives. And when I told her that I needed to finish my state of the parish report last night, she said, "What's so hard about that? You're in Indiana, the end." So wouldn't that have been a good state of the parish report? Everyone just remember this, I am better than my sister. A few weeks ago, when Terry Scott started putting together her treasurer's report, she looked at me with concern and said, "I have nothing good to say." And when Terry says something like that, you better take her seriously. And in fact, I did, because her thoughts echoed mine. I had been contemplating my report and wondering whether I could find anything good to say. I was seriously regretting running a stewardship campaign with a theme like more than enough. How could I stand up in front of all of you, both in person and on Zoom, and claim that that was true? I mean, let's look at the facts. We ended our 2022 financial year in the red by a little over $1,500. We are about to present an approved 2023 budget with a deficit of $9,463. In my years here, we have only presented a deficit budget once before, and that was of only a few $100s. This is nearly 5 figures. My hours have been cut from 37 hours a week to 35 a week. In February 2022, our senior warden, Gwen Alexander, died. She was also a delegate for diocesan convention. Also in February 2022, Terry Scott, our treasurer and music director, was out with an extended period with medical troubles. Cindy Keck, head of Altar Guild and Hospitality, continues to battle cancer. Around Easter, Skip and Laura Barnett, one of our musicians and our Sunday school teachers and so much more, moved to Virginia. Deb Walters, vestry and head of the cemetery committee, has had a rough 2022 in and out of the hospital. Bob Berkey, who is on Zoom today and is our junior warden, had a heart attack. There were times this year, I will admit, when I felt like I was all alone, trying to hold things together without our key leaders. And to add insult to injury, Sid Sunday began an internship at St. John the Evangelist and will be there all of 2023. And in May, Tom Gressick's internship here ends. And so we'll lose both him and Barbara. Oof. More than enough indeed, I thought. How cheeky of me to preach that, I thought. Like Terry, I thought that I had nothing good to say. But then I thought of Deacon Melissa Renner and her 2020. Everything that I say today is with Deacon Melissa's approval. She is the deacon at St. John the Evangelist in Elkhart. Now, let's remember that no one's 2020 was fantastic because the pandemic and the lockdown started. But hers was even worse. She was diagnosed with breast cancer and an extremely aggressive form of breast cancer at the beginning of 2020. In the midst of a pandemic, she had radical surgery and reconstruction. She had chemotherapy, lost all of her hair, and felt like she had been hit by a truck much of the time. Couldn't have any visitors because, of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and she was immunocompromised. And then, on a nice day, when she was actually feeling human and like she could do something, she and her husband decided to go kayaking on the Elkhart River. It was not a good kayaking trip. She tells this better than I will. And if you want to hear the whole story, it is a podcast. I can point you towards the podcast and you can hear the whole story in her words. But I am going to shorten this quite a bit in the interest of time. She ran into a log. She's kayaking in the Elkhart River and she ran into a log. Now that would be bad enough, but she needed to get around the log in order to continue her trip down the river. So she had to try to situate her kayak sideways, parallel to the log, so that the current was hitting her sideways. And then with her hands, try to pull her kayak around the other side of the log. Anne, you're a kayaker. Does this sound fun? No. For those on Zoom, she shook her head no. Moreover, because of the weirdness of the way the water, the current of the river was hitting the log and her kayak, it started to fill her kayak until her kayak completely filled with water, capsized, and she went under. She was not wearing a life jacket, something she says now was one of the stupider things she's ever done. She went underwater. The current pulled her under and then pushed her back up where she hit her head on the bottom of the kayak, pulled her under again, pushed her up where she hit her head on the bottom of the kayak again. This happened a number of times before she surfaced and grabbed onto another slippery, slimy, yet scrapey log. And so she's hanging onto the log and the current is pulling her legs underneath the log. So she's kind of in this C shape. And she's looking around trying to figure out what to do. Her husband is quite a ways down the river in front of her. She tried yelling for him. He couldn't hear her. And so she's looking around trying to figure out what to do. And off to her left towards the bank, she sees in this gross snarl of like dead wood and garbage. You know how those gather in rivers sometimes? She sees in that snarl a red sign with white letters spelling G-O-D on them. And she looks at that and she thinks, if I don't get out of this river, I could die today. I did not fight cancer. I am not going through chemotherapy so that I can die in the Elkhart River. And she looked over and saw that sign that said God on it again. And she said, God is with me and I am not dying today. And so she took her chemotherapy body and all the strength that was in it and hauled herself out of the river so that she was sitting on top of the log. And then she decided, all like her head hurts because it's banged on the bottom of the canoe. Her arms and her legs are scraped because they've been rubbing against the log. She decides that she really needs that sign with the word God on it. So she inches along the log, takes out the sign. And what does it say? It says, your worst day with God will be better than your best day without him. Now, a lot more happened that day. Deacon Melissa and her husband lost both of their kayaks and all of their gear that day. They ended up being rescued by like 3 ambulances and 2 fire trucks or something. And they both lived. Now, all in all, this doesn't feel like a great 2020 when I look at the whole of her story. But do you know what Deacon Melissa says about it? She says, God was with her through it all. God was with her, and here I am directly quoting her in the podcast that I listened to, except I'm replacing the me's with hers. God was with her through breast cancer. God was with her during the pandemic with breast cancer. God was with her in the river. God is with her in her remission. God is always with her. And she says, God is always with all of us. And our worst day with God will be better than our best day without him. Do you hear that? Do you hear that? I am here at annual meeting to tell you that God is with us always. And our worst day or week or year with God is better than our best day without him. Yeah, all of those bad things I started out talking about are still true. Money woes and cut hours and people sick and dying. But God is with us. And that means that our life together here is better than our best day without God. And guess what? Our scripture passages from today tell us the same thing. From Isaiah and quoted in the gospel, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. We could replace that with any number of things. The people with a deficit budget have seen a great light. From the Psalm, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom or what shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom or what then shall I be afraid? And in our gospel, Jesus was literally with the people at the same time that his cousin John the Baptist was arrested and eventually put to death. God was with the people when one of their greatest prophets was arrested and put to death. God is with us now. God is with us when money is tight. God is with us when a priest's hours are cut. God is with us when leaders die. God is with us when leaders are sick. And God is with us when leaders move away. Now, Terry Scott eventually found honest, good things that she could say in the treasurer's report. We don't have a mortgage. We carry no debt. A surprisingly small number of parishes can say that, folks. Those are good things. The parish is paying me a competitive wage. We have a wonderful parish family. We are blessed. And as I contemplated Terry and I contemplated Deacon Melissa's story, I was able to think of good things that I can say too, and say them honestly and with joy. In fact, I was able to think of more good things than I could bad. Yeah, we ended 2022 in the red, but our income was more than we had budgeted for. In a year with high gas prices and outrageous inflation, you all contributed more than we had expected. Folks, we could have ended the year a lot more in the red if you had all said, gas prices, inflation, I need to cut down on what I'm giving. Thank you. Thank you for your outstanding stewardship of this parish during a tough financial year. Yes, we are presenting a deficit budget for 2023, but again, our expected pledge income, what you all pledged, went up from 2022 to 2023. Our deficit is not because you're not giving. Our deficit is because our costs have gone up so much, our utilities and such. That is good and joyful news. One of the costs that went up was my salary. So I'm going to explain some stuff, and Tom can correct me if I get anything wrong. One of the things that has gone on behind the scenes in the diocesan office is this. The diocesan office and diocesan council always put together what they call minimum clergy compensation. So all clergy across the diocese, depending on their years of service and how many hours they work, have to make at least X amount of money. The diocese hasn't raised that since 2019 because of the pandemic. So all clergy's salaries, at least according to diocesan standards, have flatlined since 2019. And meanwhile, as you all know, gas prices and inflation have gone up. So this year, Diocesan Council did something pretty dramatic. They voted for an increase in all diocesan minimum compensation of 8.5%. That's a mighty big pay raise. And they warned all of the parishes well in advance so that vestries and treasurers and finance committees could prepare for that. What I'm trying to tell you is that my hours were decreased from 37 to 35, but I'm actually making more money in 2023 than I did in 2022. So I'm thankful that I didn't see both a cut in hours and pay. That is fantastic, and I am thankful for that. When our senior warden, Gwen Alexander, died in 2022, I was prepared to beg people to step into that role. In fact, I did beg one person until Joy Wakefield came in out of the blue and said not only was she willing, but that she felt that God was calling her to do this. How fantastic is that? And what a blessing she has been. Things have gotten done, even with so many of our key leaders sick this year. In so many cases, other people have stepped in to fill the gaps. Thank you again for your faithful stewardship. And we've even begun some new things in 2022 and will continue through 2023. Look at our partnership with the LGBTQ community, for example. We had our first youth drop-in on Friday. How great is that? And because it's new and word hasn't gotten out, our adult volunteers outnumbered our youth. Also fantastic. Look at our service to Pride Academy. Joy has all sorts of birthday bags out there. I have a bag of hats and mittens and gloves sitting in my office ready to go to them. And we have continued to do things that are and always have been important outreach. The Bristol Community Food Pantry, the Angel Tree and Food Baskets, the CARES program, my discretionary funds. If I have forgotten anything, I apologize. At this point, I was writing at 9 o'clock last night. I've forgotten what number I am on, so I'm just going to do this with my hands. say new bullet point of good things. Our attendance numbers have held steady in a world in which church attendance numbers are dropping across the board. I had a bishop from Canada tell me once, if you're holding steady, you can count that as a win. And believe me, I do. And last, we have even gained wonderful new members in both our in-person and in our Zoom communities. And thanks be to God for that, yes? We have a lot of work to do this year. Our stained glass windows are coming out. We expected them to come out like about now. Instead, they're coming out in March. That means that they will most likely still be out during Holy Week and Easter. But do you know what, folks? That's okay. The kingdom will still come in its fullness, even if we are in the fellowship hall for Holy Week and Easter, and God will be with us. We need to raise money to pay for those stained glass windows. In a less than ideal economy, you can expect to start hearing about the capital campaign right quick. And that's okay, because God will be with us. In the meantime, we are going to be writing grants like you would not believe. Grants for the stained glass windows, but also our opening our doors to the underserved LGBTQ community opens up the possibility of getting grant money to upgrade our building in ways that will serve both us and that community. So, for example, our basement has not been restored since it flooded in 2021 because insurance didn't cover the restoration and we don't have the money. But that basement is where our only unisex bathroom is, where our only genderless bathroom is. And we're serving the LGBTQ community, where sometimes kids like having bathrooms that don't have a women's or men's sign on them. We would like to ensure both our safety and the safety of this still persecuted community who enters our doors. And we'd like to do that with an upgraded security system with cameras and recordings and panic buttons. We can't afford that either. So we will be writing grant applications for all of those things and be able to say that it is not just for us, it is for the wider community. And so, by the way, well, our partners. The LGBTQ Center of South Bend has grant writers on staff, and they have offered to help us with our grant applications. God is truly with us. We have youth working toward confirmation. We have adults working toward ordination. We are in conversation with the civic, educational, and religious leaders of our local community. We love and we serve one another. I honestly cannot think of a place that I would rather be than this place right now, because you all rock. You all rock. And God is with us. God is with us in the stuff that we wish were different. And God is with us in the good stuff. God is with us in the pain and the anxiety, in those moments when we say we have nothing good to say. And God is with us in the happiness and the joy. That, my friends, is the state of the parish. There's lots to do. And it sometimes feels like there's not enough resources to do it all. But God is with us. And Deacon Melissa is right. Our worst day with God will be better than our best day without him. And one might even say that with God, we always and forever have more than enough. Amen.